Cybernetics is essentially the study of patterns. And as it began to be recognized that humans have our own patterns, societies have our own patterns, patterns don't just exist in mathematics or in nature, scientists are now able to identify potentially cancerous breast tissue years in advance. Even our most powerful machines 5 years ago could have identified. I mean, that's awesome. That's great. AI is good. We should do that. We should solve cancer.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Growth Leads. If you're here, this is the right place to be, because here we learn fantastic growth stories from people who are building the products that we use every day or inspiring others to build products that we use every day. And today we have Emily, who is doing probably something on the second direction, but also on the first direction, because Emily is combining creating different beautiful, insightful presentations and stories about AI in the world of AI where we are all living today. But also she's a VP of design in a full-time role. And I'm super curious to hear more how you're combining all of these things together. Before we start, for those who are listening to us, please subscribe to this show on your favorite platforms not to miss new episodes, and just stay in touch with us. And also, if you have any comments, any feedback about the show, please let me know. It really, really helps me creating more stuff for you and making it relevant. So on that note, I'm happy to introduce you, Emily Campbell. Emily, while preparing for this episode, I've learned several things I haven't heard about you before when I saw you first in the Hatch conference, where I've been together with you a couple of weeks ago. One thing that really surprised me was that you were a director of experience strategy at Envision back in the days. Then you were also head of content at Book Club. This is why I think your content is so incredible. And now you're doing so many things in parallel, like Shapes of AI, Women of AI, VP of Design. Can you tell about yourself? I think you can do it way better than I.
Well, thanks so much for having me. And it's really great to be here. Yeah, I've had one of those careers that has been pretty circuitous. So, on the one hand, it's given me the opportunity to explore just kind of this world that we're building within and building for from many different perspectives. Actually started out in economics before I moved into design way back in the day. And, along the way, even though I've had different roles, the thing that's always made me curious is looking at transformation. How are companies changing? How are markets changing? And now, how is technology changing and how are we changing it? And I think that's kind of the connective thing for me is I look at design and experience and what we do as product designers through this lens of how do we need to be thinking about the ways that the world and our surroundings are affecting what it is we're trying to do and how we behave. What does that tell me about how to help you create better products to support that behavior, but also what should we be anticipating might be changing next? It's been colorful. It's been fun.
Wonderful. And yeah, so maybe beyond your design background and like very diverse background, what inspired you to start building your own projects like Women in AI, the Shapes of AI? Can you tell maybe your story of how you landed on these ideas and projects?
Yeah. I'd say one thing about me is I'm relentlessly curious. And so with both of these side projects, they started from an open question. So for Women in AI, it started from the question of why are so many of the conversations and threads related to this evolving landscape, oriented towards the men that are showing up. And there are many incredible guys who I follow and whose perspectives I want to hear, but there are also just some absolutely inspiring women across the entirety of the field doing incredible work. And so that started from that question. In terms of the shape of AI, I was leading design at a company called Vendor, and we were beginning to bring generative AI into our tool very early on, right after GPT-3 launched. And as I was watching us begin to prototype with this new technology, I was realizing many of the patterns that we currently rely on start to break or maybe are not as appropriate for the types of interactions that you're having with this new paradigm. And I also was beginning individually and within my team to explore new patterns. how do you interact with computers when you're conversing with the computer, not just as like a chat bot, but actually working together to define what you see on the screen and what information is presented to you and so on. And that opened up this other side of it, which is how are our patterns evolving and what is showing up that hasn't been here before. I needed to wrap my head around this. I was curious. And so that's where it started. And then as I began to explore it and write it and talk about it with people in my world, I started to hear, wow, this is really interesting. Let's see what's behind this. And that's where the Shape of AI originally started, is quite literally learning out in the open so that I could share my discoveries and honestly learn where I was maybe right and also maybe where I was wrong to get the input from the community.
I personally believe that one of the most important jobs of anyone who is creating a digital product is to make the first user experience smooth, intuitive, and memorable. For that, we need to provide users with a friendly assistance throughout the whole experience, beyond just the first session. Comment AI is a user assistance platform that exists for the sole purpose of helping users. It provides a user-centric alternative to traditional pop-ups and chatbots. The first thing that I love about Comment AI is their Copilot. This is an AI support agent that can use AI to answer questions, perform actions for the user, or show them how to do some complex things with ease. The second thing that is incredibly useful are nudges. This is a great alternative to annoying pop-ups. Instead of bombarding users with too many messages, you can show them a proactive and relevant message that guides them right to the action. And you can get all of this within Comment AI as a no-code platform that product, support, and marketing teams can use to influence user behavior in a positive way while respecting their needs. Thank you again, Comment AI, for supporting this episode of GrowthMate.
Wonderful. It reminds me that curiosity is definitely the open door to any new projects, any new beginnings we are starting. It also reminded me how I started GrowthMates, because I was curious to learn from other people in the industry like you. And it was back in the days when I was at Mira, leading the team there. And there was a ritual that I hosted called Growth Community of Practice, where we invited internally some people to talk and share their stories and patterns, observations, and then it turned into what we have today here, which is fantastic. But one thing I'm also curious about, I remember when I was listening and watching your presentation at Hatch Conference, it was fantastic, by the way. One thing that really fascinated me was how deeply you dove into the history of interaction design and how you connected that with the current world of AI. So where does AI take its roots? So if you can tell us about that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so funny. There's a line I've heard applied to many scenarios, which is the past is prologue. We're, as human beings, we don't reinvent things or invent things on a new basis all that often. We pull from the past, we pull from other disciplines. And that is actually where this whole concept of AI started. So you had a concept of cybernetics that started to show up in the 1940s. Cybernetics is essentially the study of patterns. And as it began to be recognized that humans have our own patterns, societies have our own patterns, patterns don't just exist in mathematics or in nature, that opened up this question of, if humans are pattern makers in our behavior and in how we organize ourselves and our action, is there a world where some subset of those patterns could be reproduced by machines? And so that's where this kind of concept started to originate in the late 1940s. And then in the 1950s, there was a workshop organized by the founder of this cybernetics movement at Dartmouth College in the United States. And the scientists who organized it, they're called the Dartmouth Workshops, they needed a way to refer to this new way of thinking about the world, which is the mechanization of human patterns. They didn't want to just call it cybernetics or call it after one of the existing disciplines, in part because they recognized this was a new kind of mashing together of multiple ideas. It shouldn't live within one of our disciplines. And so they picked the name artificial intelligence. And I think this is such a funny thing to note, because today we hear artificial intelligence and we think machines that are going to take over the world and do all these incredible things for us, and these robots that are going to be our peers and our partners. But the reality is artificial intelligence as a term isn't anything precious. It's just a word that they picked in order to refer to this new way of thinking about pattern recognition, really. And it kind of, by removing some of that preciousness from the term, I think it gives us the freedom to say, what is this really? Like as we talk about getting to, that moment of singularity when robots can behave as humans, that's not what we're doing. We're not working right now within the singularity. We're working within robots and programmed machines repeating behavior, that humans or nature can perform on its own. Is it really artificial intelligence? Is there a new way of maybe framing this conversation to remove some of the preciousness about it and really help us focus on the substance? So I'm sure we'll get into that, but I just think it's such an interesting origin. Last thing I'll note that I think is just interesting for people to know is this idea of communicating with bots is also not new. MIT actually created a natural language processing bot back in the 1960s and demoed it. And so, even that I think is a useful thing for folks to know. It's not like we're out here carving entirely new canyons through the landscape. We're taking a lot of what has existed and just applying it at a different scale and at a consumer scale. I think maybe that's the part about this current moment that's distinct.
Yeah. It also reminded me about the other metaphor you used in your presentation about the black box, but you used it in the context of how the algorithms work actually, like the recommendations that we receive in our social media. Now I'm sort of the consumer of that, but also a power user of that because I'm actively posting on social media and I really want to better understand how this algorithm works. However, what I'm worried about is like for end users who are consuming the content, sometimes it's not super reliable, and probably AI can help with that somehow if we are using it properly. So what do you think about that? And if there is any potential to apply AI in the good manner to see if it can solve this problem of the black box for all of us end users of social media?
Absolutely. And I think that is the message that I would like people to hear. It's what I emphasized in my presentation as well. AI itself is just technology. How we deploy it and how we regulate it is the thing that's going to determine, is it creating more chaos in our lives or improving our lives? So, before we talk about the challenges and even just this like algorithmic issue, there are so many examples where this AI technology is creating just absolutely astounding results through the process of this computation. For example, in cancer research, scientists are now able to identify potentially cancerous breast tissue years in advance of what, even our most powerful machines 5 years ago could have identified. I mean, that's awesome. That's great. AI is good. We should do that. We should solve cancer. But I think what you're calling out is this more like societal issue. And that is where things start to get sticky. So we started in the last decade and a half or so to get these algorithms that just increasingly dictate our life as more of our life is lived online. And they're proprietary, they're protected. So we don't know how Facebook or Meta decides what to show us on Instagram or in our Facebook feeds and what our parents are seeing. If you go to the Twitter For You or whatever it's called now, your main feed, it's just, most of it is garbage that you're being pushed by this machine that seems biased against your own preferences. I mean, you're no longer an agent of your own experience. And I think that we've already seen the problems that causes. It causes harm in terms of social division. It causes harms in terms of sort of solidifying unhealthy biases. It certainly causes harm we're seeing in teenagers, particularly teenage girls, who are being fed content that is just absolutely destroying their sense of self-worth. But that's a problem with how we're regulating the technology, not necessarily the problem with machine learning itself as a backbone to AI. So can AI help? Maybe, if we allow it to, if we regulate it so that it actually can be quite powerful. And here's why. Today I go to Instagram and I don't know why I'm seeing what I'm seeing. I see some things from accounts that I follow, but I also see a lot of stuff from accounts I don't follow. I don't know what the machine knows about me. I don't know how it's weighting that. I don't know what it knows about my most recent behavior, because these companies sell data to each other, and, our cookies and all these other things track us around the web. I'm not in charge of my experience. I don't own the way that I navigate in the world. If I go into the real world, I can choose to turn left or turn right at an intersection. I can say I'm going to go check out this new neighborhood, or maybe I'm going to stay away. I don't have that same sense online, and that's a real issue. What AI allows us to do from a technology perspective is to interact with the program, to interact with the machine ourselves. As humans, to be able to say, why are you showing this to me? No, show me more of this. Show me less of this. Weight towards this thing that I care about, or weight this other value less. Hey, just because I searched for socks online on Amazon doesn't mean every ad you show me needs to be socks. Let me give you context of what I'm looking for. I'm actually building a back to school list for my son. Show me things that I should be adding into that list. Don't just show me socks. So that, to me, is the opportunity when it comes to our social spaces, our content, and how we consume the content of others. But the challenge is, how do we deploy it? How do we regulate those that are deploying it? How do we create power for the individuals using these systems, not just for the arbiters or the creators of these systems? That, I think, is the sticking point that I'm hoping we focus on going forward.
I love this emphasis, especially the thing that probably in order to shift this perspective, we need to shift the way how these platforms are measuring success, right? So it reminds me of the concept of natural frequency. In growth methodology, it's quite common thing to consider when we are thinking of building an engaging experience. So these platforms, they imagine somehow, or they target that your natural frequency should be 5-10 times a day, or they are measuring the time that the user spends in their app. So their backlogs, their initiatives are linked to that. So they need to drive more usage and more time spent in platforms like that. However, what if we shift the concept of like natural frequency? What if for one user, natural frequency is like 2 times a week, and for another, it's like every day, but like a little portion of time, and become more ethical and educate this system and this algorithm to show it in a different way, in a different frequency, not bombarding with these notifications. But it requires a very difficult shift in the mentality of product teams who are building and prioritizing these backlogs. Otherwise, it's going to be quite a big business problem. So there is no solution for that. These are just thoughts that our job probably is just to raise these thoughts, send them to the universe, and let's see if somebody can resonate to that. But one other thing or area that I wanted to talk to you about, you've mentioned, or you've also shown a couple of examples in your talk, how AI is going to shape the future of products, including some examples of digital products that we use every day, like Notion, Canva, probably are examples. And it's interesting because people who are listening to this show are building this product. And I've seen many examples already how they implemented AI. However, probably the pattern that I see as well, AI is not becoming a part of core or fundamental experience yet. So the adoption of that probably is quite low. For example, we can take Notion. By the way, I had of design at Notion a couple of weeks ago on this show. And I see their AI component everywhere, like, use me, here I am, this is AI, please use my AI extension. But I'm not using it for some reason as an end user. I don't know how to adopt it, how to involve it into my workflow using a platform like Notion. And I've seen similar situations as well on LinkedIn, for example. I'm still not relying on their AI. So what's wrong here? Or maybe they are doing everything right and it just takes time for us, for people, for end users to adopt. Or there are other ways how companies can use AI in a bit different manner.
Goodness, there's so many things to explore there. It's definitely a interesting moment in where we are, because a lot of things are happening all at the same time. So the first is there's a new bright, shiny thing. And, there's that driving force behind a lot of this. And a few months ago, I was calling it, there's a show called Portlandia, and there's a funny sketch where they're making fun of a specific aesthetic of like the 2010s, and they call it "put a bird on it." Oh, this is just a boring tote bag. Now there's a bird on it, and it's exciting. It's a joke, but it's also very much the world we've been in with this AI technology over the last year and a half. And what we're finding is, if you look at like market reports, companies that are adding AI but not adding value are seeing their costs go up and their revenues go down. And we're watching that happen in real time. There's certainly a bubble to that approach. But there's also something happening that I think is a net interesting, maybe a net good, and that is, how might this new technology change the way people interact with, particularly in these work environments, we're seeing it adapt more quickly, change the way people interact with information. So two things: product teams don't have to identify every use case to optimize for, and also don't have to optimize for some at the expense of others. And also within the user experience, create a more, think about usability more as the person interacting with the computer as like a partner, or an agent is another word we're using, or an assistant, as opposed to, I have to show you everything and then you have to go navigate it. So I think of like a system of record, where you have a big database of information. And up until now, as we think about the usability of this, it's what are our defaults? Which columns should show by default for different views? Do we need to have custom views? Do we need to have all these filters? And it just gets more and more and more complicated. And then we have to say, well, who are we actually building for, and constrain it? Not that that's necessarily a bad thing, but with AI, now we have the ability to say, when a person needs an answer from the information that is already in the system, what's the easiest and most effective way to get them the answer? Not what is the most effective way to organize everything on the page to help them find it. It's like a sense and respond as opposed to just linear discovery. That is one of the big changes that we're seeing. Now, it also then opens up this question of, well, how do I know that the computer is right? How do I know that the computer understands my intent? How do I know that the computer is not showing me incorrect information or the wrong information? And that's where a lot of these patterns I'm observing start to come in. How do you help people tune their prompt to ask for things in a way that the computer can understand? How can the computer show its work so the user can have governance over it and say, oh, wait, before we go deeper, before you run this 4-minute process to retrieve all this information, or go and build this UI or whatever, let me gut check that we're actually on the same page. Show me some examples, or show me how you're thinking about this. And then finally, once I get the results, how do I know where those results came from, how the computer derived the logic to show them, and then how can I continue to go deeper or change the parameters? So we're seeing, and that's how we talk to humans. Like if you and I start a conversation and I say, hey, let's grab lunch. Your first response isn't, okay, Emily, here's a list of 250 lunch items within your 50-mile radius. That would be ridiculous. We'd never talk to each other that way. Instead, you'd say, okay, what are you in the mood for? What'd you have yesterday? Do you have a craving? We get information from each other in the context of conversations so that we can slowly find the right answer together, but it's not transactional. It's conversational. We're sensing each other's cues. We're picking things up in the language we use that, can help us figure out where the other is at. That is where we're moving to within this context of AI. Now, that's a very B2B oriented way of thinking about it. Not to go too far down another path, but I do think, just touching on the last point you made before in terms of like, well, can we do anything about this incentives problem other than just kind of shooting it up into the ether? As product people, I think we can be thinking about this in the consumer setting as well, which is there a way to provide value to people that isn't just me extracting your data so I can serve you ads, so I can serve my business? Like, our current business models are broken because I think there's a natural limit to the interaction model of social media or, social links, search-based engine, optimization and so on. When I'm interacting with the program myself, maybe we can unlock new ways for me to generate value for people, even in a consumer setting, that either could open up new payment opportunities so we don't have to rely on ad revenue to fund our business. Maybe it can change the way that we incentivize people to come back and stay and use our products without just pinging them and notifying them and annoying them and creating that sense of FOMO. What other ways could this unlock human behavior in a more net positive sense? I think is an interesting challenge for us to be thinking about.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You reminded me also about the thing that AI can generate value, but also it can speed up time to already existing value that the product is generating. So recently I've been exploring Loom as an example, and their onboarding and first user experience in particular. And Jenny, who is the head of product, she has been on this podcast as well, shared several fantastic examples. For example, they introduced AI for summaries, for chapters, for several other things in the first experience, just to speed up this time to value and reduce some unnecessary friction so users can faster share their videos with a better quality. And this seems to be not like anything like out of the box, but it helps. It really helps to speed up this time to existing value that the platform is delivering. So this is one trajectory how AI can be utilized well. Another one can be like what you've described, how to generate the net new value or net new opportunity. And here, in terms of B2B landscape, I'm very curious if you have some examples about that, if you have seen or noticed some products who are doing this well.
There are many good examples, and I'm trying to figure out where to even start. The one that I often start my presentation with, and when I'm talking to folks, is Perplexity. The reason I start there is I think they are one of the best examples of a company that is relying on existing paradigms, but new patterns to reshape value. It's not fully B2B, but I think a lot of what they're doing is informing what other companies are doing in this space. So for example, you want to get an answer to something. Right now, whether you're doing it yourself in the consumer setting or, Notion is another example here, looking for data inside of a database or inside all of your documents, you don't even know where to start. So how do you know how to ask the right question? Well, one of the things that Perplexity has done is it's taken the existing paradigm of search, but said, let you expand your search through natural language. Describe what you're looking for. Don't feel like you need to guess the right answer up in the first place, right? Like you don't need to go and is not minus cite. You just say, this is what I'm looking for. And here's some, parameters for it. Only show me academic articles or so on. Then it gives you an estimate of what it thinks you're looking for, but it shows you its work. And that's another thing we're seeing Notion adopt. And, anytime that you see numbers like 1, 2, 3 inside of text and then set below it, I'm pretty sure Perplexity was the first company to set that pattern. I've been calling this, like they're at a high level footprints or citations inside of the work. Well, this has a really interesting value. It doesn't just let the AI say, hey, I can prove to you that this is coming from a real source because I can point you to the source I got it from. But it gives you the ability to say, oh, interesting. Either I didn't know this document existed, so now I know where to go to get more information on my own, or I can now direct the AI to change the lens of what it's looking at. Sora Labs is an edtech platform in this space that's doing really interesting work. It's a company that was created by Josh Bersin, who's a thought leader in this kind of how are companies rethinking the experience of educating their employees. Now, historically, education at work has been, I need you to learn a skill, go watch this webinar, get the certification, and come back and tell me you've achieved it. What Sora Labs and similar products are doing is saying, education at work isn't just about skills. It's about how do you capture all the knowledge that's in the domain of your company. Let's say you are a sales associate and you need to understand what did we launch last quarter and why? My customer has a problem. I need to help them solve it. This is the problem they have. Where can I go next? In using the same paradigm, a tool like this one or many of the others can say, oh, well, you might want to look at the release notes. Here's a webinar, but actually I'm just going to give you a summary of these documents to start to make sure this is the thing you're looking for. Also, here's 3 people at your company who have been working on these. You can go Slack them. And now you can see how technology is not, I need to give you all the answers. It's, I need to help you see things you're not already seeing amongst your existing network, the content that already exists, the people that are already there. So how might AI help us connect into our backlog of content, into our broader network of knowledge within our company? That's a really interesting use case that these patterns are unlocking. We're seeing this in terms of helping people do their jobs better and in a more human way. So if you are somebody working in tech support or account support for a company like Salesforce, and you have a customer who says, oh, I need help with blank. Today or yesterday, you'd have to go and find the summary of their information and review their notes, and it's on you not to miss anything, and you're relying on the previous notes of others. It's not a great experience for you, and it's likely not to be a great experience for your customer, for the person you're interacting with. Well, now, in the middle of talking with this person, AI can help pull some of these resources out of the deep and say, hey, this person tends to find these types of resources useful. You might recommend a video instead of recommending text. Or here's how people like you have solved this problem before. So you don't have to come up with the perfect solution or read some technical documentation guide. The system can help you be intelligent about what's worked for customers in these situations before. So now you're working with the customer as a partner, and you're working with the machine as a partner to help solve a problem, not just perform a task. The machine is performing the tasks for you. So you're be able to interact at the human level more intentfully and more presently. These are the types of things, and just to kind of put a bow on this, it's not how can AI recreate our work. It's not how can AI solve all of our problems. It's how does AI do the technical parts of our work, the mundane parts, so that we can focus on being present, so that we can be thoughtful and lean into the human side. I think that's, especially in this B2B context, the thread that I'm seeing open up that I'm really excited to follow.
Absolutely. And in addition to that, how we can stay more human, more present, and more creative. Because this is what I was thinking about, that as a creator myself, I wouldn't like to replace that enjoyable part of my work. I would like to create stuff myself. I would like to have an ownership of these things. Even getting back to the roots, sometimes I'm collecting some digital art and thinking about how cool is it to have something like that or to create something like that. And probably there is a portion of people like me who are creators, inside in their heart, and they wouldn't like to be replaced, right? And I think AI can help us be more creative, faster, easier, use different dimensions. So I've recently been to an exhibition where I've seen a beautiful AI 3D art created, immersive experience. That was amazing. And in day-to-day environment, you reminded me, for example, about Reforge AI extension that I started using it as well myself as a growth advisor. I sometimes need to remind myself about certain facts or double check if this is the right definition of, let's say, a particular growth loop that I want to reference to the client. So it really helps me find this information easier, check it if it's okay, if it's all right, and be more reliable, right, in my work, in what people are paying me for. So there are many, many, many dimensions probably how we can use that, how companies can use that, and maybe to get back to us, everybody who is listening to this show, everybody in the world. So what we can do, what is in our power, we might be not creating or not being a CEO of the company who is creating or who is in charge of all of these decisions, but what we can do to move it in the right direction.
Yeah. I do think, particularly in countries that are accelerating this technology but don't have an existing regulatory framework around it, and I'm thinking the United States in particular, putting aside our product hats for a moment, I really don't think that we should ignore the fact that regulation has to play a part of this. And, there's two types of regulation. There's regulation that restricts behavior, and there's regulation that incentivizes behavior. And it's probably some mix of both. But one of the things that I'd like to see is helping people become more aware about what they are consuming, because that affects the incentives of what companies create. So you're starting to see, right now you've got this created by AI, or AI could make mistakes. We're seeing these little badges pop up everywhere, but we really haven't figured out the right solution for how to make that work at scale. there's probably a regulatory need to just require, just as we do with like, you can't put an advertisement out into the wild that has blatant lies in it. If you are a platform owner who has the technology to create this AI generated content, there needs to be some sort of regulation and requirement for watermarking in the shape of AI on the watermarking pattern. I've actually started to share a lot of the regulatory frameworks we're seeing pop up around the world and the different ways that companies are thinking about this. But I haven't verified this myself. I've just seen this pop up in a few articles. It does seem that OpenAI could have the technology to watermark all of the AI-generated content that it produces through ChatGPT and through its image generator, but isn't required to, and so they don't. So I do think we need to change that because, and I mentioned, incentivizing behavior. If I'm a human and I know that what I'm looking at is AI generated, I'm going to value it differently. I'm going to value the labor that it took to create it differently. And if the machine created it at the cost of human labor, that could really change my preferences and change my consumption habits. And so in order to create more informed and activated consumers, I think we do need to regulate some of the creation aspects of this. Now, the reality is humans have been copying other humans for millennia. And some of our most incredible pieces of art have been derived from someone being under the tutelage of another artist, or sitting down and getting wasted in Paris with people looking at different problems through different lenses and creating natural inspiration. Remixing is an incredible lever for creation and innovation in a way that ultimately does benefit society. How do we balance those two? I think that's where, regulation and just awareness is going to help us get a better sense of preferences and how people want to see us move forward as a society. That's another long conversation worth having. But I do think it's something we should be thinking about as product people. In terms of individuals, what it starts with is just being aware of what it is that we are leaning into. There's a lot of hype around AI that's misinformed. And some of that misinformation can just kind of be annoying or harm us in the short term, like the emphasis on prompt engineering as a core skill everyone needs to have. That's honestly probably going to prove to be something that's inaccurate, given how quickly these machines are improving beyond our capabilities to shape, no pun intended, their own prompts into themselves. Other things like just making sure that what we're sharing to our platforms is actually coming from humans, doing that extra due diligence for those of us who are paying attention, and showing others what we're seeing. How do you identify an AI-generated image? Most of the stuff out there is pretty identifiable, or at least it is for now. So how can we help people become more wise to that while the outputs of this technology is still identifiable, to create in others that sense of skepticism, healthy skepticism, as these engines get better? Because if we don't catch it now, the technology is going to outpace our ability to catch up. And I think that's the scariest thing that I see, but also the empowering thing about this current moment we're in. We have a brief period of time when the pace of change is still slow enough, just barely, that we might have a running shot at getting ahead of it and preempting, some of the things we need to adopt as behaviors and regulation changes. I don't even know if a year from now or 2 years from now that'll be the case. So there is a little bit of a, kind of 4-alarm fire in my head on a regular basis.
Oh yeah. And Emily, I was listening to you for almost 40 minutes, and what is visible for me is that you're very passionate about this topic. And I just cannot hold myself from asking you how you find energy for that. You have a full-time job, you have 2 projects or 3 projects or businesses in parallel. How is that possible? And 2 kids or a dog? I've heard you've mentioned that before we started recording this episode.
Oh my goodness. I'll tell you what doesn't energize me. It's not AI. It's not the hype of AI. It's not right now, much to my own chagrin, probably, I haven't monetized my content. That isn't what drives me. I mentioned earlier that I've always just been really curious, and I've looked at the world through many different lenses. I've been a multi-day wilderness river guide, and I've seen how people interact outside their comfort zone when they have to set down their iPads. I've been an economist. I have always loved history. So for me, it's humans. It's human behavior. It's assuming good intent, assuming I'm not a cynic, assuming that as people, we want to get along with each other. We want to have a better world for ourselves and for our kids. We want to feel like technology can help us. We don't want to feel lost and left behind. That honestly is I think what energizes me the most. Not to sound too altruistic or anything, but all of us have this. Like if we're parents, we look at our kids and we say, hey, you're entering a world that is very different than my own. How can I get curious about the way your world will change? And even if some of it is scary, what could we be doing differently today to help you prepare for the future and be more successful? I look at some of the big challenges that we have facing us from, climate change and the social disruption. It's all really scary. What could I be doing differently? How could I be talking to my neighbors differently? What knowledge do I have that I can share with others and gain a perspective that I didn't have to make me a better consumer of the world and a better citizen of the world? And how can I help lend my knowledge, what I'm learning through my curiosity to the others? The thing that makes us human is being human. Right now, the machines are operating as individuals. And, that's, I think, actually a really distinct part about this moment we're in. Humans, society, our ability to talk to each other and communicate to each other, our ability to be curious and reshape how we spend our time so that we can go follow some curiosity, that is distinctly human. And our ability to use this technology to share what we're learning with others is a really, really powerful capability that we have in taking our humanness through the lens of technology. And I think that is the thing that excites me most. Machines are going to get smarter. They're going to get more connected. Some of that's going to be bad. Some of that has the potential to be good. But what ultimately makes us the most powerful is our society. There's an interesting concept I just want to share without going too far down this road either. If you spend some time Google or perplexing, I don't know what the verb is, perplexing, Googling, whatever, it doesn't matter. If you go and search for the concept of long time, there's a lot that we can learn from people who maybe aren't folks we're talking to regularly, particularly thinking about indigenous wisdom. I live in the American Southwest, and the native people here, many of them have this concept of the community itself, the society itself having intelligence. And you'll actually find in many cases, there's not a ton of written history or written knowledge. Humans, individuals, are passing in and out of this intelligent machine. We're born, we live, we move on, but we contribute our knowledge to the actual intelligence machine, which is the society, and we benefit from that. And I think we've been trained, especially in our Western world, to think so much about the individual's experience. How can I solve this? But there's something to be said for the collective wisdom that we all can gain by talking more openly about this and learning from others, the collective knowledge and the collective opportunity to approach this problem together. Now, I realize that isn't necessarily going to be easy at the societal level, as proven by the world around us, but even just within our individual networks, within our teams, within our companies. How could we make this more of a conversation and not something that we have to individually solve or individually overcome? And how can we gain from the knowledge of others, other disciplines, other perspectives, other, cultural perspectives, just as the people who created this concept of artificial intelligence did so by bringing together many, many different disciplines, many, many different ways of looking at the world and making sense of it. How could we apply that ourselves today and use that as a collective call to action?
Wow, this is so interesting that you touched upon the collective mind, because I'm also into the exploring Jungian psychology, and in general, the collective mind and collective psychology is a big part that influences our behavior and our emotional intelligence and our patterns. And what I started thinking about, I'm also reading a book called Women Who Runs with the Wolves.
I have that on my bookshelf here.
Wonderful. And it's about the tradition of storytelling, right? So women were sharing stories with other women, passing through generations. And this is how different patterns were adopted, different beliefs were adopted. But now, probably, our kids or kids of our kids will be not relying on this particular method of getting knowledge, but we'll be asking AI and other platforms, hey, what should I do in this situation? Or
can you tell me more about that? And you're right, like whatever we are given this as an input right now will influence the behaviors of generations in the future, which is a new concept. I haven't been thinking about that, honestly.
I love that. And it opens up this question of, right now, AI is not generating anything new. It's starting to, and there's some really interesting conversation happening, kind of troubling about what happens when the AI starts feeding on itself. But in this moment, again, it's giving us our stories back. If you ask AI a question, it's giving you the best guess based off of, all the data points of human inputs around that topic or related topic. And that's maybe something we should be thinking about, is when AI hallucinates, it's doing so in a way that it's trying to make sense of the stories that it's heard, but it doesn't understand them because it's not human. It doesn't have the full picture, just as we as individuals don't have the full picture beyond our own lens. And again, I think this just gets back to this concept of like, what if we didn't call it artificial intelligence? And I included this in my presentation at Hatch as well. What if we called it augmented information? What if it's a way of interacting with the information we're already naturally producing, but in a way that maybe our human brains are capable of doing with enough time and enough, energy and focus, but realistically aren't going to do? What if we thought about it through these other lenses? Advanced interaction. It's not just interacting with computers anymore. It's now giving me the power to be more of a peer and a partner, an equal to the processing power of this computer by letting it show its work and redirecting it. What if, even as designers and product people and marketers, what if we weren't thinking about this technology as this magical thing that's now in the ether we can add to our webpage or add to our product, but instead seeing it as a medium? How could we use this in a way that ultimately augments the human experience, but maintains that human center, as opposed to replacing the human experience because, oh, look, AI can write a blog post for you. So the frame that we use and the way we think about this and its role to us is going to have an outside impact on how we deploy it. And how we deploy it today is going to create the defaults for how we think about it tomorrow and how our kids think about it tomorrow. And yeah, the stories that future generations are telling themselves about this moment we're in today. I really do love this idea of agency as humans. We have the ability to change this, maybe not as individuals, but by working together. We just need to decide to create the collective power to do so.
Oh, I love this. Emily, just wrapping up this conversation, I think we can talk for hours about that and things beyond that. As a tradition, there is a lightning round at the end of this and each episode. One thing you already probably touched upon this question. What do you think AI shouldn't ever replace?
I don't know how simple of an answer this is, but it's talking to each other. AI should never be the place we go for final answers. AI should be the thing that helps us guide our discovery, but ultimately communication, our own discovery, our own skepticism and curiosity, that ability to reach to the next step and work within the human layer, I think is just the most critical thing about how we can approach this technology going forward.
Yeah, human interactions, definitely. And I think in general, I noticed that it becomes even more required or so that people started value more like human real interaction. I haven't seen so many retreats, to be honest. Maybe I'm biased and whenever I see like there is a retreat about this here, retreat about for designers, retreat for entrepreneurs. And I think humans started to value human connections even more after the emergence of these technologies, which is probably a good and healthy thing to keep in our society. And the other lightning question, as GrowthMates is a community, so we are trying to find people who care about building meaningful products, shaping them in the right direction, caring about user experience. Is there anyone you would like to see on this show someday? Any names that pop up in your mind?
There are so many names, and when you posed this question in the notes, I was sitting here thinking, what individuals would I call out? I think I'm going to have to give that one a little more thought and share some additional names to follow in the show notes. But here's what I would say. Think beyond our disciplines. I think we should be listening to some of the people that are shaping new economic theories. Like Mariano Mazzucato is an economist who I follow, who is forcing us to think differently about how we define the word value in our world. And that relates to the technology products that we're building and also what we value in terms of labor in our society. The fact that we've been taught to value things over the things it takes to create that thing, the research, the sociology, and so on. So number one is just, follow outside of your discipline. I also think people who are working in public governance, a lot of this conversation around AI is focused on the deployment into our consumer tech and into our B2B, enterprise type payment structures where everything is very transactional. But what does this look like when we deploy it at a social scale? How can we help people where it's expensive to deploy these models? Maybe the people using the technology can't pay. Ethically, we can't get them to pay by showing them advertisements. So what does that value structure look like? And how do we ensure we're creating amazing experiences inside of those public spaces as well? People who are working in social justice as well, because quite frankly, many folks, like I look at the two of us, we're sitting here taking time on a Thursday on a podcast. That time is not available to many people who could benefit from understanding this technology, and also who in many cases are folks who have jobs that tend to be more automated and might see their jobs fundamentally change or even be at risk in the coming years. So how can we understand from people who are looking at-risk labor pools and who are working with folks who make up the core of our society, but who often don't get to be seen or don't even know that places like this exist. I really think for those of us who are crafting these experiences, we have a responsibility and an opportunity to think beyond our own bubble and realize the decisions we're making, even if we're just making it in the context of our B2B SaaS product, those incentives, those defaults are going to change the defaults of this technology as a whole and are going to change the way that this technology is applied to many situations that we're not even paying attention to. So becoming self-aware of the second and third order impacts of the decisions we're making today are going to help us stave off pretty big crises, or at least go into future crises with our eyes wide open. So I promise I will help create a list of names that can be in the show notes. I'm just not sure I could whittle it down to 3. But that's what I would be doing if I had an extra hour. I'd be finding those folks.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, Emily, so much. And just to wrap it up and say thank you, where people can find you, where people can stay connected with your amazing thoughts and observations in this new era of AI and beyond that.
Well, I am increasingly hopelessly online on LinkedIn. It seems to be the only social platform left, which I'm just going to bite my tongue on the, editorializing I would make about that statement. EmilyCampbell.co is my personal homepage. shapeof.ai or theshapeofai.substack.com is where I've been sharing my thoughts on this. Womenin.ai as well is another place where people can just see that work and contribute. It's also not monetized. It's there for folks to share people that they think should be seen. And I'll just say, as I said at the top, I have more questions than answers right now. I'm really curious to hear what other people are seeing, and really hope that folks will reach out and tell me what they think I'm wrong about, and also what I missed or what I should be paying attention to myself.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Emily, for joining us today. And for anyone who is listening to that, please share your feedback, your comments, your questions or corrections, or any observations that you have. That really, really helps to collect this collective knowledge and to share it with everybody else. So thank you, Emily, again for joining today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening. Subscribe to the show on growthmates.club and get free playbook with frameworks and insights. If you find this valuable, please share it with your friends and colleagues, and subscribe to the show on your favorite platforms to get new episodes. Let's keep growing together.